The race for electric outboard dominance has changed its course. EPropulsion came out of nowhere and now have unrelenting momentum. Their Spirit 1.0 Plus, 3 horsepower equivalent, is their best seller, but there are others making their way into this game. It's not a matter of when, it's who. There has emerged a new contender capable of taking everything. Mercury has finally stepped forward and created their entry into the electric line, and it is seriously intimidating. But contenders always look unstoppable until they face the champion. At the end of this video, there will be no question. Okay, so here's the stats from the Spirit. Cost $2,599 out the door with the motor and battery pack. You can also break that up to just buying the motor individually at $1,449 and then buying an extension cable to run it to your own set of batteries, or to just a bigger EPropulsion battery pack, which a lot of people do like running bigger battery packs on sailboats and dinghies. This is a 1 kilowatt motor, hence the Spirit 1.0, which is 1,000 watts, and we subsequently have a 1,276 watt hour battery. For its size and horsepower limit, it comes in very lightweight at 43 pounds. That's comparable to any 2.5 3 horsepower motor out there. That is with the battery included. However, you can remove the battery from the motor so it gets even lighter. 1,276 watt hour battery, up to 80 minutes at 100% throttle. At 40%, the runtime increases substantially. It comes with a very generous 5-year warranty, and it has service shops all over the country. My favorite things about this motor, personal highlights for me, it has a fantastic strength to weight ratio. It matches the equivalent of my 6 horsepower Yamaha 4-stroke gas outboard in terms of max speed and overall ability to push the boat, but it has none of its defects or weaknesses. For instance, it has no drop in performance with elevation changes, no worrying about cold starts, carb issues, spark plugs, impellers. All maintenance pretty much goes away. The floating waterproof battery is a huge win. The breakaway prop, which nobody talks about, but I don't know why, I think that's like maybe one of the best features for the motor completely. It's super quiet, it's the quietest in the industry, ultra lightweight even with the battery included, and it's extremely efficient. Now for the Mercury Avatar stats, it's $1,000 more. The input is 48 volts at 1 kilowatt or 1,000 watts. Battery capacity is pretty generous, but still not as generous as the EPropulsion's. The weight is 66 pounds. It is substantially heavier than the other motor. Runtimes are also pretty good, but they're not as generous as the EPropulsion's. For highlights, even though the motor is heavier than the other one, it still has a pretty good power to weight ratio, and it still has all the good features of an electric outboard over a gas outboard. Those things are all still present. And it looks awesome. Just simple elegance of design. There's a few things here and there, but everything from like the 450R, the manifold and cowling, they brought that over kind of the same design. It looks really freaking good. Just in blind sight for comparing cold stats and numbers, there's not a whole lot I can highlight in wording, but you just have to kind of see it. Then you can make your own comparison and choice on whether or not this motor is for you. Hey, if you're still here and you find this video useful, please hit the like button. Commenting and a share would also be super helpful. Share it to anybody who also has questions like this for these two motors. All right, now let's get into it. Before we continue this video, you need to know that we bought these motors outright. We're not sponsored. This is not a paid program of any sort. We're just here to compare and contrast the two motors and highlight their features. Let's go ahead and start with the Mercury Avatar. This is the one I tested first. I was very excited to get this motor because I'm a huge fan of Mercury. Everybody knows I'm kind of a fanboy and there's already an inherent bias. The minute I laid eyes on it and put it on my boat, it was love at first sight. The test boat is a Bass Pro Shops Prawn Prowler 10 that is sort of modified. The elegance of the design is quite moving at first sight. The digital readout is awesome, the battery meter, the different mode selections, the readout all the way to 1 kilowatt. It also has a tiller style very comparable to their EFI portable outboards, and it's got a good bit of power and torque off the line. But at the first draw, it is noticeably a little loud. Well, I guess if you're comparing it to the equivalent like 3 or 4 horsepower Mercury like 4-stroke outboard, that thing's a glorified lawnmower and it's really loud, so I guess there's a win there. It's even quieter than the 4-stroke EFI portable outboards, but compared to the EPropulsion, I mean, all you hear when you put this motor on is the waves splashing against your boat and the wake being created by it. Otherwise, you wouldn't even know the motor's on. Now, the sound of a whiny electric motor may or may not bother you. I personally don't care, except for the stealth deal. I depend on stealth tremendously as a fisherman, so I care. So how do we rate efficiency? It turns out with these electric outboards, if you max them out, your runtime decreases significantly, but these motors have such high torque and momentum out of the hull that they only really need 20 to 40% and in some cases 50% throttle to achieve 80 to 85% of your boat's max speed with the equivalent horsepower motor. And at those intervals, they are substantially more efficient. For instance, Nick here tested 3 electric outboards. They all got around 6 miles an hour, but they all claim to be better than each other. So how we did this is we backed them off to 5 miles an hour and saw what watts it took for each motor to get that speed. When we tested the Spirit, it only took 350 watts. That's only 35% of its power to reach almost all of its top speed, where this one took 500 watts. That's half the power the motor can actually produce. But Nick's new canoe is probably not the best boat for this motor, and we both know this. The shaft is like their medium length, and we would need like an extra short shaft to get max efficiency off of this boat specifically. And the EPropulsion shaft was a short shaft, and it worked a lot better, hence the better efficiency. But that won't be the case for my boat, where it's the opposite, where this shaft length is the absolute perfect shaft length for this boat, and the EPropulsion is actually too short. I did this in 2 scenarios. I did the 3 mile an hour test because 3 miles an hour is the absolute max my trolling motor will get at 100%. And per the Merc calculation, it only took 180 to 200 watts, which is really only 18 to 20% of the motor's actual capacity to get to 3 miles an hour. To reach 4 miles an hour, I was between 5,500 and 5,800 watts. And then the fish finder kept fluctuating in and out really close, and I just kind of left it there. That was the best I could actually fine tune it to get. When I pushed it to wide open throttle, it went to 1 kilowatt right there on the radar, and we got a whopping 4.8 miles an hour. When I tested the EPropulsion with the exact same test, the 3 mile an hour test yielded, I think, 170 watts, 174, 175 watts. And then when I went to do the 4 mile an hour test, we landed at 58.2 watts. Go figure. When we pushed it to wide open throttle at 1 kilowatts, we got a whopping 4.5 miles an hour. Now looking at the underwater footage, I do believe if we'd have had an equivalent length shaft, it would have done a lot better. You could see it actively ventilating and popping out of the water. So shaft length matters tremendously with these boats. So make sure you get the proper shaft length for the boat or you'll be miserable. When I had the Avatar on, I wanted to use it more, but the fish were everywhere. I was on them and I was just slaying. So I was on the trolling motor most of the time. To make up for it, I decided to floor it. 100% battery life here, barely any use out of this motor. We floor it to 1 kilowatt all the way back from the basin onto the marina. And man, I'll tell you, that battery just started just depleting like you wouldn't believe. We were at half battery by the time we got to the marina. So it was a good stretch, but a little alarming. If this is the only electric outboard that you've ever tried, you probably would love it forever. But pretty much everything I did with the Avatar, I did to the Spirit. I also floored it for a really long time. And though there's not a huge disparity between power ranges, there is a very noticeable difference. The EPropulsion clearly came out on top on this. Just kind of caught off guard because, you know, Merc is a gigantic company. I mean, I have Mercs on all of my boats. Mercury made a 600 horsepower turbo outboard that steers itself. It doesn't even need steering linkage. And when you look at this thing, it looks like it's going to get on plane. It's seriously very intimidating upon first sight. I mean, seriously, look at EPropulsion's prop. Not bad, but then look at this thing. The thing looks like it's going to take over the world. Like, look how big the whole lower unit is. It even has a cavitation plate. It looks like it's the dominant motor out there. Except for, it's not. It doesn't win. In fact, I think it loses. In all the tests that Nick and I ran, the EPropulsion kept up, if not actually beat it. And arguably at top speed, if I'd had a longer shaft, we might have at least tied it. The Spirit is more efficient battery-wise. Sure, it doesn't look near as flashy as the Merc, not by far, but it's meant to be functional. That whole thing is super portable. That battery comes off. And if it accidentally falls in the water while you're trying to put it on your motor, you just go and get it, and then put it on the motor, and then go on with your day. We didn't test if you could do that with the Merc's battery, but, you know, we were afraid to do it, so we chickened out. Instead, we did the weight test. Nick actually did it. He took this thing, and, I mean, it's got the battery and the shaft. It's all attached, and he's lifting it with little to no problems. And then he got this thing. I don't think there's anything terribly special about this motor, but at least it's light. And then you have the Avatar. We kept seeing in like models of people just holding it with no struggle, just like models just holding it. And we're thinking those are photoshopped or that those motors are stuffed with foam, because Nick, who just lifted those other motors, is clearly not happy with this motor. And there's also the factor of the prop safety feature in EPropulsion's lower units. Like, it's super important to me. I watched my wife run over a rock at full speed, and I was thinking there went my prop or the prop pin or the whole lower unit. And then I ejected it, and it's relatively unscathed. And so in further research, I don't know exactly how they do it, but they have like a little release clutch or a breakaway feature in the prop to where if it hits on something, it'll just stay there and not destroy the lower unit until you move the motor out of the way. It's pretty genius. Mercury kind of had one. When I put my hand there, obviously in the lowest setting possible so my hand would get chopped off, it would stop for a split second, but then it would power through. I think that would probably be useful if you just glanced over a rock. It would just deflect it just enough for there to not be so much damage to the prop or lower unit. But if there's a lot of rocks, that prop and that unit is done for, or at least the prop pin is. But at least it's something. It's better than this one that doesn't have any feature at all. In fact, if you put tension on it, the motor spins up faster. So if your unit gets bind up on a rock or something, goodbye to your prop and your prop pin, or your lower unit, depending on what you hit. And then there's portability in mind. So I travel a lot. I stick this motor in my toy hauler. I want to stick it in there, and I want to not have to worry about it until next time I take my trailer out, right? I put them in these bags, and there's the whole bag for the motor, and then you got a little backpack for the battery. It can all be carried quite easily and broke open whenever you need, and you can just assemble that motor in like 2 seconds. Snap the battery on, connect the cable, and that's just if you get the bags. You could also just throw it in your truck like this. I mean, these two motors fit back here just fine, but the Avator, well, felt like it needed its own seat. It wasn't going to be good back there with the other two. I'll tell you what, yeah, it is heavier. Yeah, it doesn't perform any better than the others, but that really wouldn't be enough for me to not buy this motor. What really kind of does it for me is the price point. Despite how it looks, there is no feat of engineering that would justify an extra $1,000. It doesn't bring anything new to the table other than looks. If you're all about flexing in front of your friends with an electric outboard, then I guess okay, but I think most people are going to go for the biggest bang for your buck, and that still, to this day, is the reigning champ. That is the Spirit 1.0, and that is my review. Thank you guys for watching.